Just because the world does not notice your light does not mean you were born to stay in the dark. The grand crystal ballroom shimmered beneath thousands of hanging lights, each one reflecting against polished marble floors and towering glass walls overlooking downtown Atlanta. It was the most prestigious charity gala of the year, attended by celebrities, executives, investors, and some of the most influential people in the country. Waiters moved gracefully between tables draped in white linen. A live orchestra filled the room with elegant music. Every guest seemed determined to be seen. Then something unexpected happened. Conversations began to fade. Heads slowly turned toward the entrance. One by one, guests stopped speaking altogether. Near the doorway stood a woman in an elegant ivory gown that seemed to glow beneath the crystal lights. Her posture was poised. Her smile was calm. Her presence carried a quiet confidence that immediately commanded attention. No one could look away. Several photographers rushed toward the entrance. Social media influencers whispered excitedly. Even members of the board exchanged surprised glances. The woman moved through the ballroom with effortless grace, greeting people politely as she passed. Yet the most remarkable part was not how beautiful she looked. It was the fact that many of the people staring at her had met her dozens of times before. They simply had never truly seen her. Across the room, Alexander Hayes stood beside a group of investors discussing a pending acquisition. The billionaire CEO was accustomed to being the center of attention. Tonight, however, his focus disappeared the moment he noticed the crowd's reaction. Curious, he turned toward the entrance. The conversation around him instantly faded. For several seconds, he simply stared, because the woman captivating the entire ballroom was Jasmine Brooks. 8 months earlier, Jasmine had been one of hundreds of employees working behind the scenes at Hayes Global Enterprises. Most people barely remembered her name. She managed logistics, organized schedules, solved problems, and quietly helped everyone around her succeed. Yet despite her intelligence and dedication, she often went unnoticed. While other employees fought for recognition, Jasmine remained invisible. Now she stood beneath the ballroom lights looking like someone entirely different. Or perhaps, Alexander realized, she looked exactly the same. The difference was that people were finally paying attention. Jasmine continued walking toward the center of the room. Her gown was elegant but simple. Her natural beauty required no dramatic display. What truly transformed her was something less obvious. Confidence. For the first time, she carried herself as though she belonged there. Not because anyone had given her permission, because she finally believed it herself. Several executives who had once overlooked her now rushed forward to introduce themselves. Others pretended they had always respected her work. Jasmine responded with warmth and professionalism, never allowing pride or resentment to guide her actions. She had spent too many years doubting her worth to waste energy seeking validation from people who failed to recognize it earlier. Alexander watched everything from across the ballroom. A faint smile appeared on his face. He remembered the first day he noticed Jasmine, not because of her appearance, not because of her background, but because she solved a crisis that no one else could solve. While senior managers argued and blamed one another, Jasmine quietly found a solution. That moment had changed everything. Yet standing here tonight, Alexander understood something even more important. He had not transformed Jasmine into someone extraordinary. He had simply become one of the first people willing to acknowledge the extraordinary person she had always been. As the orchestra continued playing and cameras flashed across the ballroom, Jasmine stepped beneath the spotlight to deliver the evening's keynote address. Hundreds of eyes followed her. Hundreds of people waited to hear her story. And not a single person in the room could imagine that only 8 months earlier, she was the woman nobody looked at. Jasmine Brooks had spent most of her life learning how to blend into the background. Long before the crystal chandeliers, the elegant gowns, and the admiration of powerful executives, she was simply a young woman trying not to attract attention. 8 months earlier, her mornings began before sunrise in a small apartment on the outskirts of Atlanta. The building was old but clean. The furniture was modest. The walls displayed framed photographs of family members who had always encouraged her to dream bigger than her circumstances. Every day, Jasmine followed the same routine. Coffee, a crowded train ride, then a long walk to the headquarters of Hayes Global Enterprises, one of the most successful companies in the country. While thousands of employees dreamed of climbing the corporate ladder, Jasmine focused on something simpler. She wanted to do good work. That was enough. She worked in logistics coordination, a department few people noticed until something went wrong. Her responsibilities were important, but rarely visible. She organized schedules, managed shipments, coordinated vendors, and solved countless problems behind the scenes. Many projects succeeded because of her efforts, but recognition usually went elsewhere. Jasmine never complained. She believed hard work would eventually speak for itself. Unfortunately, the corporate world did not always operate that way. During meetings, people often interrupted her. Others forgot her name. Some colleagues spoke over her even when she had the correct answer. None of it happened because she lacked intelligence. In fact, Jasmine was often the smartest person in the room. But years of being overlooked had quietly shaped how she viewed herself. She stopped volunteering ideas. She stopped drawing attention to accomplishments. She convinced herself that remaining invisible was safer than risking disappointment. Every evening, she returned home exhausted. Yet despite everything, she never became bitter. She spent weekends helping at community programs, mentoring young students, and supporting local charities. Her kindness remained intact even when her confidence struggled. One rainy Thursday afternoon, Jasmine sat alone in a conference room organizing materials for a major executive presentation scheduled the following morning. Senior managers had spent weeks preparing for the event. Investors from across the country would attend. The project carried enormous financial importance. As Jasmine reviewed schedules and delivery confirmations, she noticed a serious problem. A critical vendor had submitted incorrect data. If left uncorrected, the mistake could damage the entire presentation. Jasmine immediately notified several managers. Hours passed. Nobody responded. Most assumed the issue was minor. Others were too busy protecting their own responsibilities. As evening approached, employees began leaving the building. The office gradually emptied. Rain tapped softly against the windows. Jasmine remained at her desk reviewing numbers again and again. The more she analyzed the situation, the more concerned she became. Finally, she made a decision. Instead of waiting for someone else to act, she stayed late and rebuilt the entire logistics model herself. It took hours. By the time she finished, the city outside was covered in darkness. She printed a revised report and submitted it before heading home. The next morning, executives gathered inside the boardroom. Investors filled the seats. Expectations were high. Then, only minutes before the presentation began, the original error was discovered. Panic spread quickly through the room. Managers searched for solutions. Questions flew in every direction. That was when someone found Jasmine's revised report. Within minutes, the crisis disappeared. The presentation proceeded successfully. Millions of dollars remained protected. Most people focused on the outcome. Only one person focused on the name printed at the bottom of the report: Alexander Hayes. While executives congratulated one another and celebrated the successful meeting, the billionaire CEO quietly stared at a single page of paper. For the first time, he noticed the employee who had been sitting in plain sight all along. And although Jasmine had no way of knowing it yet, that ordinary Thursday would become the day her entire life began to change. Jasmine expected the next day to be exactly like every other day. She arrived at the office shortly before 8 o'clock, carrying a reusable coffee cup and reviewing her task list while riding the elevator to the 23rd floor. The previous afternoon's crisis already felt distant. She assumed the executives had solved everything without even noticing her contribution. That was usually how these situations worked. She stepped into the logistics department and settled into her desk, prepared for another ordinary day. Less than 30 minutes later, an email arrived that immediately caught her attention. The sender was the executive office of Alexander Hayes. Jasmine read the message twice to make sure she understood it correctly. The CEO wanted to meet with her personally at 10 o'clock. Her first reaction was concern. Had she made a mistake? Had something gone wrong with the report? The questions followed her throughout the morning. By the time she reached the executive floor, her hands felt slightly unsteady. The reception area looked more like a luxury hotel than a corporate office. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the Atlanta skyline. Fresh white flowers decorated polished marble tables. Everything reflected the level of success Hayes Global Enterprises had achieved under Alexander's leadership. When the receptionist escorted her into the CEO's office, Jasmine immediately noticed the silence. The room was large, but surprisingly simple. Bookshelves lined one wall. Family photographs occupied another. Alexander stood near the windows reviewing documents. When he looked up, his expression remained calm and professional. "Thank you for coming, Jasmine," he said. She nodded politely and took a seat. Alexander placed a report on the desk between them. It was the same report she had prepared during the previous night's emergency. "You solved a problem that several senior managers failed to recognize," he said. Jasmine felt her face warm slightly. Compliments were not something she received often in corporate settings. "I was just doing my job." Alexander studied her for a moment. "No, you were doing more than your job." The conversation that followed lasted nearly an hour. For the first time since joining the company, someone asked for Jasmine's opinions instead of simply assigning tasks. Alexander wanted to understand how she approached problems. He asked about her education, her career goals, and the improvements she believed the company could make. At first, Jasmine answered cautiously. Years of being overlooked had taught her not to expect much from these situations. But as the discussion continued, she gradually relaxed. Her intelligence became impossible to hide. Ideas flowed naturally. Solutions appeared effortlessly. By the end of the meeting, Alexander had learned something important. Jasmine possessed a rare combination of analytical thinking, emotional intelligence, and practical problem-solving skills. More importantly, she had achieved all of it without recognition or special opportunities. As Jasmine returned to her department, she noticed curious looks from several coworkers. News traveled quickly in large organizations. People wanted to know why an employee from logistics had spent an hour inside the CEO's office. Some assumed she had made a mistake. Others invented explanations of their own. The attention made Jasmine uncomfortable. She preferred remaining unnoticed. Unfortunately, that was becoming impossible. 2 days later, Alexander announced the launch of a high-profile strategic development project involving multiple divisions of the company. Executives expected the initiative to influence the organization's future growth for years to come. During a leadership meeting attended by senior managers and department heads, Alexander revealed the project team. Several familiar names appeared. Then he mentioned Jasmine Brooks. The room became noticeably quieter. Some people looked surprised. Others looked confused. A few appeared openly skeptical. Jasmine felt every eye turned toward her. For years, she had sat quietly in conference rooms while more confident voices dominated discussions. Now she found herself standing in the center of attention. As whispers spread across the room, Alexander remained completely composed. He had made his decision, and while nobody understood it yet, he had just opened a door that would change Jasmine's life forever. The announcement changed the atmosphere around Jasmine almost immediately. What had once been a quiet work environment suddenly felt very different. Conversations stopped when she entered rooms. Curious glances followed her through hallways. Some employees congratulated her sincerely, but others questioned whether she truly deserved the opportunity. Jasmine tried to ignore the attention and focus on the project itself. She knew the assignment represented more than a promotion. It was a chance to prove to herself that she belonged in spaces she had spent years believing were reserved for other people. The project team met for the first time on Monday morning inside a modern conference room overlooking downtown Atlanta. Senior managers from multiple departments filled the table. Most had years of executive experience. Jasmine was the only person without a prestigious title beside her name. As introductions began, she could feel the skepticism in the room. One manager glanced at her resume and raised an eyebrow. Another asked whether she would mainly be handling administrative support. The assumption stung, but Jasmine remained professional. She had learned long ago that arguing with people's expectations rarely changed them. Results did. During the first few weeks, the team faced several complex challenges. Deadlines shifted. Budgets tightened. Departments struggled to coordinate priorities. Meetings often stretched for hours without producing solutions. While others debated, Jasmine listened carefully. She studied patterns. She identified inefficiencies. Then, when the moment was right, she offered practical recommendations. At first, some people ignored her suggestions. Yet time after time, her ideas proved effective. Small problems disappeared. Communication improved. Costs decreased. Gradually, even the most skeptical executives began paying attention. Alexander noticed everything. He observed how Jasmine prepared more thoroughly than anyone else. He noticed how she treated every employee with respect regardless of position. Most importantly, He saw something she did not yet see in herself. Confidence waiting to emerge. One afternoon, after a particularly successful presentation, Alexander asked Jasmine to join him for coffee in the executive lounge. She hesitated before accepting. The luxurious space overlooked the city skyline through towering windows. Jasmine felt slightly out of place sitting among executives and investors. Alexander sensed her discomfort immediately. "You keep acting like you are visiting someone else's world," he said. Jasmine looked down at her coffee cup. "Maybe because it feels that way." Alexander smiled gently. "The only difference between you and the people in this room is that they already believe they belong here." His words stayed with her long after the conversation ended. That evening, Jasmine stood in front of the mirror inside her apartment. For years, she had focused on everything she thought she lacked. She was not the loudest person, not the most glamorous, not the most connected. Yet for the first time, she considered a different possibility. Maybe success was not about becoming someone else. Maybe it was about finally recognizing the value that had been there all along. Over the following months, subtle changes began appearing. Jasmine started speaking more confidently during meetings. She enrolled in leadership workshops. She updated her professional wardrobe with elegant but simple pieces that reflected how she wanted to present herself. The transformation was not driven by vanity. It was driven by self-respect. Her posture changed. Her voice became steadier. Her eyes carried a quiet certainty that had never been there before. And as summer approached, the woman who once tried to disappear into the background was slowly becoming impossible to overlook. What nobody realized was that the most dramatic change had nothing to do with appearance. For the first time in her life, Jasmine was beginning to see herself through the same lens Alexander had seen from the very beginning. Jasmine's growth became impossible to ignore. By the middle of summer, the woman who once avoided attention now walked through the headquarters of Hayes Global Enterprises with quiet confidence. She still greeted receptionists by name. She still helped co-workers whenever they needed support. Nothing about her kindness had changed. Yet something inside her had shifted. The hesitation that once followed every decision had begun to disappear. For the first time, she trusted her own voice. The strategic development project continued exceeding expectations. Executives who initially questioned her place on the team now requested her input before making major decisions. Department leaders invited her into meetings that had previously been reserved for senior management. Jasmine accepted every opportunity with gratitude, but she never forgot where she started. One afternoon, Alexander invited her to accompany several executives to a leadership retreat held at an upscale resort outside Savannah. The event would include presentations, networking opportunities, and meetings with potential investors. At first, Jasmine almost declined. The thought of spending several days surrounded by powerful business leaders made her uncomfortable. She worried she would not fit in. Alexander noticed her hesitation immediately. "You have earned your seat at that table," he told her. "The only person who still doubts it is you." Those words followed Jasmine throughout the trip. The resort overlooked the Atlantic Ocean. White columns framed elegant walkways. Palm trees swayed gently beneath clear blue skies. Everything seemed to belong in a magazine. During the first evening reception, executives and investors gathered beneath soft lights, while servers carried trays of refreshments through the crowd. Jasmine stood near a balcony overlooking the water, feeling slightly out of place among people whose lives seemed so different from her own. Then something unexpected happened. Several investors approached her directly. They wanted her opinion. They had heard about her work on the strategic project. They respected her ideas. One conversation became two, then three. By the end of the evening, Jasmine had spent hours discussing business strategy, community development, and leadership. Nobody focused on her title. Nobody questioned whether she belonged there. They simply listened. Later that night, Jasmine stood alone in front of a mirror inside her hotel room. She wore a simple navy dress she had almost decided not to bring. The reflection staring back at her looked familiar and unfamiliar at the same time. Her features had not changed. Her background had not changed. Her story had not changed. Yet the way she carried herself was completely different. She no longer looked like someone asking permission to exist. She looked like someone who understood her worth. The transformation continued after returning to Atlanta. Jasmine began working with a professional mentor recommended by Alexander. She attended public speaking workshops. She learned how to navigate executive environments without losing the authenticity that made her unique. Most importantly, she stopped comparing herself to everyone around her. For years, she had measured her value against impossible standards. Now she focused on becoming the strongest version of herself. As autumn approached, Hayes Global Enterprises announced its annual charity gala. The event was considered one of the most prestigious social gatherings in the region. Business leaders, philanthropists, and public figures would attend. The company selected Jasmine as one of the keynote speakers due to her contributions throughout the year. The announcement shocked nearly everyone. It shocked Jasmine most of all. Standing on stage before hundreds of influential guests felt unimaginable. Yet deep down, she knew she was ready. A week before the gala, Alexander met with her after work. Together they reviewed her speech and discussed the evening schedule. As they prepared to leave, he paused for a moment and looked at her thoughtfully. "Do you know what is different about you now?" he asked. Jasmine smiled. "I finally have better clothes." Alexander laughed softly and shook his head. "No, you finally see yourself the way everyone else should have seen you from the beginning." Jasmine carried those words home that night. And as the city lights reflected across her apartment window, she realized something remarkable. She was no longer becoming visible because other people had changed. She was becoming visible because she had finally stopped hiding. The night of the gala arrived wrapped in golden light and anticipation. Long before the first guests entered the grand crystal ballroom, preparations were already underway. Fresh white roses decorated every table. Crystal chandeliers reflected thousands of tiny lights across polished floors. A string quartet rehearsed quietly near the stage while event coordinators moved through the venue, making final adjustments. For most attendees, it would be another elegant evening filled with networking and celebration. For Jasmine, it felt like stepping into a chapter of life she once believed belonged only to other people. Earlier that afternoon, she stood in front of a mirror inside a private suite overlooking downtown Atlanta. The ivory gown hanging beside the window was beautiful, but it was not what captured her attention. Instead, she found herself studying her reflection. Months ago, she would have focused on flaws. Tonight, she saw something different. Strength, growth, confidence earned through effort rather than appearance. She smiled softly, remembering the woman who used to avoid attention whenever possible. That woman still existed. She had simply learned to stop doubting herself. As evening settled over the city, luxury vehicles began arriving at the ballroom entrance. Executives, investors, public figures, and community leaders stepped onto the red carpet beneath flashes of cameras. Inside, conversations filled the room as guests greeted one another beneath shimmering lights. Alexander Hayes moved through the crowd speaking with business partners, but his attention remained divided. He knew Jasmine would arrive soon. More importantly, he knew many of the people attending had no idea who she truly was. They remembered the quiet employee from logistics. They did not yet know the leader she had become. Then the ballroom doors opened. A gentle hush spread across the room. Heads turned almost instantly. Conversations faded. Glasses paused halfway to lips. The reaction moved through the crowd like a wave. Jasmine stepped inside with calm elegance. The ivory gown complemented her natural grace without overwhelming it. Her posture was confident. Her smile was warm. She looked extraordinary, but not because of the dress. She looked extraordinary because she carried herself like someone who no longer needed approval from anyone in the room. People who once overlooked her struggled to hide their surprise. Executives who barely remembered her name suddenly wanted introductions. Investors who had ignored her during earlier meetings now moved closer, hoping for conversation. Yet Jasmine greeted everyone with the same kindness she had always shown. Success had elevated her circumstances, but it had not changed her character. Across the ballroom, Alexander watched the scene unfold. Pride filled him, though not for the reasons many assumed. He was not proud because Jasmine looked beautiful. He was proud because she finally understood her own value. As the evening continued, guests took their seats for the keynote presentation. Jasmine stepped onto the stage beneath a spotlight that illuminated the entire ballroom. Hundreds of eyes followed her. Months earlier, such attention would have terrified her. Tonight, she welcomed it. She spoke about opportunity, resilience, leadership, and the importance of recognizing potential in unexpected places. Her words were thoughtful, authentic, powerful. The audience listened in complete silence. By the time she finished, many guests were visibly emotional. Then the applause began. It started with a few people standing. Then more followed. Within seconds, the entire ballroom rose to its feet. The standing ovation seemed endless. Jasmine looked across the crowd and felt something she had never experienced before. Not validation, not victory, belonging. And as the applause echoed beneath the crystal chandeliers, she realized the most shocking transformation of all had nothing to do with how the world saw her. It was that she had finally learned to see herself. The standing ovation from the gala continued echoing through the company long after the event ended. Photographs from the evening appeared in business publications, social media feeds, and corporate newsletters across the country. Yet what surprised Jasmine most was not the attention. It was what happened afterward. For the first time, people stopped talking about how she looked and started talking about what she accomplished. Her keynote speech sparked conversations throughout Hayes Global Enterprises. Employees from every department reached out to thank her for sharing her story. Young professionals asked for advice. Community leaders invited her to participate in development programs and leadership panels. The recognition felt meaningful because it focused on substance rather than appearance. Meanwhile, the strategic development project entered its most critical phase. Months of preparation had led to a final presentation before a group of major investors considering a partnership worth hundreds of millions of dollars. Executives spent weeks preparing projections, forecasts, and growth strategies. The future of several company initiatives depended on the outcome. On the morning of the presentation, the atmosphere inside headquarters felt tense. Conference rooms remained occupied from sunrise. Assistants moved quickly through hallways carrying documents and updated reports. Senior leaders reviewed every detail repeatedly. Then, only hours before the investor meeting began, an unexpected complication emerged. A key data model contained conflicting information from multiple departments. The discrepancy threatened the credibility of the entire proposal. Panic spread quickly. Executives gathered around conference tables searching for answers. Several managers suggested delaying the presentation. Others argued over who was responsible. As the pressure increased, familiar patterns began appearing. Too many opinions. Too few solutions. Jasmine listened quietly while reviewing the reports herself. After nearly 30 minutes, she identified the problem. The issue did not originate from a single department. It came from outdated integration methods used between multiple systems. More importantly, she already knew how to fix it. Working alongside a small team, Jasmine reorganized the data structure, verified the projections, and rebuilt the presentation model. The process took hours. Every calculation required careful review. Every assumption required validation. By the time investors arrived that afternoon, the project was ready. The meeting exceeded expectations. Questions were answered confidently. Financial projections held up under scrutiny. The partnership moved forward successfully. As congratulations spread through the boardroom, several executives openly credited Jasmine for saving the presentation. Yet the most meaningful moment came later. That evening, Alexander invited the project team to a private dinner celebrating the achievement. The restaurant overlooked the Atlanta skyline, with floor-to-ceiling windows reflecting the city's lights. During dessert, one senior investor raised a glass and addressed the group. "I have attended meetings with executives all over the world," he said. Today, the most impressive person in the room was not the CEO. It was the woman who understood every detail better than anyone else. The investor smiled toward Jasmine. Applause followed immediately. Jasmine felt her face warm with surprise. Across the table, Alexander watched her reaction with quiet admiration. The investor's words reflected something he had known for months. Jasmine's value had never been connected to appearances. Her greatest strengths existed beneath the surface. Intelligence, integrity, leadership, compassion. Those qualities could not be purchased or manufactured. Later that night, after returning home, Jasmine stood near her apartment window overlooking the city. The same skyline she had admired for years now seemed different somehow. Not because Atlanta had changed, because she had changed. For so long, she believed confidence would arrive after success. Yet she was beginning to understand the opposite was true. Confidence arrived when she stopped asking the world to define her value. The gala had introduced people to her presence. The project had proven her capability. And now, As opportunities continued opening before her, Jasmine realized she no longer needed anyone's permission to shine. The woman who once disappeared into the background was gone. In her place stood someone who finally understood that true transformation begins the moment you recognize who you have been all along. Autumn slowly gave way to winter, and with it came a season of change neither Jasmine nor Alexander had anticipated. The success of the strategic project elevated Jasmine's reputation throughout the company and beyond. Invitations arrived from industry conferences, nonprofit organizations, and leadership forums across the country. People wanted to hear her perspective. They wanted to understand how someone who spent years unnoticed had become one of the most respected voices inside a major corporation. Yet despite the growing attention, Jasmine remained grounded. She still spent weekends mentoring students. She still visited community programs that had supported her long before anyone knew her name. Success had expanded her opportunities, but it had not altered her values. Alexander admired that more than he could easily express. Over the previous months, their professional relationship had deepened into a genuine friendship built on mutual respect. They spoke often about leadership, family, and purpose. Sometimes their conversations lasted only a few minutes between meetings. Other times they stretched late into the evening as they discussed ideas for future initiatives. What surprised Alexander most was how comfortable he felt around Jasmine. In a world filled with executives competing for influence and recognition, her honesty felt refreshing. She never treated him differently because he was a billionaire. She challenged his assumptions when necessary and encouraged him to see problems from perspectives he might otherwise overlook. One evening, after a charity planning meeting, they found themselves walking through downtown Atlanta beneath strings of holiday lights hanging across the streets. The city glowed with warmth despite the cold air. Families gathered in nearby restaurants. Music drifted from storefronts decorated for the season. For a while, neither spoke. The comfortable silence felt natural. Finally, Alexander stopped near a small public square decorated with white lights and winter flowers. He looked at Jasmine thoughtfully. "Can I tell you something honestly?" he asked. Jasmine smiled. "You usually do." Alexander laughed softly before growing serious again. "When I first noticed you, I thought I was helping someone discover their potential." Jasmine listened quietly. "Now I realize I was wrong." She tilted her head slightly. "How so?" Alexander looked toward the city lights before answering. "You already had everything you needed. The intelligence, the strength, the character. I was not helping create any of it. I was simply fortunate enough to witness it." Jasmine felt unexpectedly emotional. Throughout her life, compliments had often focused on outcomes, achievements, appearances, accomplishments. This felt different. It acknowledged who she was rather than what she had achieved. Alexander continued. "The truth is, Jasmine, every meaningful change I have seen this year happened because you decided to believe in yourself. Not because of me." The words settled gently between them. For a long moment, neither moved. Then Jasmine smiled. "You know something?" she said softly. "For a very long time, I thought confidence would arrive after people finally accepted me. I kept waiting for someone else to decide I was enough." Alexander nodded. "And now?" Jasmine looked up at the lights shining above them. "Now I know it works the other way around." Their eyes met. In that moment, both understood that what existed between them had grown beyond friendship. It was built on admiration, trust, and a shared journey neither expected to take. Yet there was no dramatic declaration, no grand gesture, only a quiet understanding that something meaningful had developed over time. As they continued walking through the softly illuminated streets, Jasmine realized the most valuable gift she had gained was not recognition, influence, or professional success. It was the freedom that came from finally seeing herself clearly. And beside her walked the first person who had recognized that truth long before she ever could. By the following spring, life looked remarkably different from the way it had only a year earlier. Hayes Global Enterprises continued to grow, but for Alexander, success was no longer measured solely by revenue reports or market expansions. Some of his proudest moments now came from watching programs Jasmine helped create flourish across communities throughout Georgia. Together, they launched scholarship initiatives, leadership workshops, and mentorship programs designed to support young professionals who often felt overlooked. Every project reflected the same belief that had transformed Jasmine's life. Potential exists everywhere, even when others fail to recognize it. One sunny Saturday afternoon, hundreds of guests gathered at a newly opened community leadership center funded through a partnership between the company and several charitable organizations. The building stood as a symbol of opportunity. Bright classrooms filled the interior. Modern meeting spaces welcomed aspiring entrepreneurs. Walls displayed photographs of students whose lives had already been impacted by the programs. As families toured the facility, laughter echoed through the halls. Hope seemed present in every room. Jasmine walked through the center greeting volunteers and guests. Many people recognized her from recent speaking engagements and leadership conferences. Yet she remained exactly the same person she had always been. She listened carefully, encouraged others, shared credit generously. The attention no longer intimidated her, but neither did she depend on it. Her confidence now came from a deeper place. Near the main auditorium, a large crowd gathered for the dedication ceremony. Community leaders offered remarks. Students shared personal stories. Then the master of ceremonies invited Jasmine to the stage. As applause filled the room, she paused for a moment before speaking. Looking across the audience, she saw faces from every chapter of her journey. Former coworkers, mentors, friends, students. And standing near the front row was Alexander. Their eyes met briefly. The quiet understanding between them required no words. Jasmine smiled and began. She spoke about perseverance, purpose, and the importance of believing in possibilities before evidence appears. She described how easily people can underestimate themselves when they spend too much time listening to doubt. Most importantly, she reminded the audience that true transformation rarely begins on the outside. It begins the moment someone decides they are worthy of growth. The room remained silent throughout her speech. When she finished, the applause seemed endless. After the ceremony concluded and guests slowly dispersed, Jasmine stepped outside into the warm afternoon sunlight. The city skyline shimmered in the distance. Flowering trees lined the walkways surrounding the center. Everything felt peaceful. Alexander joined her near the entrance. For a moment, neither spoke. Then he handed her a framed photograph. Curious, Jasmine looked down. It was a picture taken nearly a year earlier during the gala. She stood beneath the spotlight, delivering her keynote address. Around the frame was a simple inscription. Not the day the world noticed you. The day you noticed yourself. Jasmine felt emotion rise unexpectedly. She looked at Alexander and laughed softly through grateful eyes. You always know exactly what to say. Alexander smiled. Only because you taught me what matters. They stood together watching families leave the center. Children ran across the lawn. Volunteers loaded supplies into vehicles. The future stretched ahead, filled with possibilities neither could have imagined when this journey began. Jasmine understood something clearly now. She had never been transformed into a princess by someone else's power. Her strength, intelligence, kindness, and dignity had always existed. The difference was that she finally believed in them. And as the afternoon sunlight painted everything in shades of gold, she realized the most beautiful chapter of her story was not about becoming someone new. It was about finally embracing the extraordinary person she had been all along.